Tonight, are you in need of some evening plans? Well, maybe it's time for a Biss episode, made just for the fans. You email in your mocks, sending them straight to me, and I'll put them on the show, and you'll shout, yippee! This is Biss, where we inspire you to create. And I'm your Aussie host. How you doing, mate? Welcome to the Bionicle Inspiration Series. I told you what it's about. Hopefully you enjoy this fan-submitted mocks episode. Of course, if you want to submit your own mocks to the show, you can do so through the email you're currently seeing on the screen. Send me some pictures, any information you want to throw in, and if you've got a link, that's always appreciated as well, so I can put it in the description below, and other people can check out your stuff. Speaking of that, if you enjoy the mocks you see in today's episodes, be sure, or in any future episodes for that matter, be sure to check the links in the description. There are emails, links, and all that sort of stuff there to my stuff, to people's stuff, all that sort of stuff. Take a look. You'll enjoy it. So let's dive on in and check out some fan-submitted mocks. The first mock we've got today is by Botzinger and is called Death Shadow Transdimensional Bounty Hunter. So I really like the eye design on this mock using that microscope eyepiece. I think it's a really clever idea, and that's always a really cool piece to use. We actually saw that piece being used in a Bionicle Lego system playset. They used it in combination with one of the light brick pieces. Really cool piece. And doing so kind of helped to create this sort of line of light down as if it was some sort of laser going and attacking the minifigures and stuff. I'll throw up a picture or something of that because it was a really cool play feature. And that's the thing, that's such an awesome piece because one, it works really well here on this mock as an actual eye, but it also is a legitimate little mini microscope. But of course there are legitimate Lego mini microphones. You could also use those if you really wanted. But you can actually magnify things with that exact piece. So who knows, maybe there's some ideas spruing around in your head about how you could really seriously utilize that in some really clever and creative ways. So know that that is a legitimate piece that legitimately magnifies. So something to think about, that's for sure. I suppose it's a magnifying glass, isn't it? Not a microscope. It's whatever you want it to be. Barrels. That's the other thing I like about this mock. He used some Lego system barrel pieces here to form the lower part of the legs, where the legs end up connecting to the toes on this mock. I think that's great. And why do I think that's great is because there's a whole bunch of different system pieces that have actual Technic connections on them. And these barrel pieces is one of them. The bottom of those barrels does have a classic kind of pinhole in there that you can very effectively and easily use to attach it to other Technic pieces and, you know, use some connectors and all sorts of different stuff, and you can attach some system pieces into your Bionicle. So look for that sort of stuff. Look for some Technic pieces, or rather look for some system pieces that have those Technic connections already available on them, because, you know, sometimes adding system into a mock can be a little bit more difficult depending on the pieces you're using. But if you have pieces that more easily flow into it and have kind of pre-built connection points on them, it makes your job a little bit easier. And, you know, like we see on this mock here, it's a really smooth flowing transition, and you get a really cool texture here on that barrel part as well. So it's cool to do and it looks nice. And the system, clever system pieces being used on this mock continue to amaze me. The torso here, of course, uses this skull piece, which actually came on an Indiana Jones set, but it came in a few other sets in a few other different colors, but I believe in dark bluish gray here, it came in an Indiana Jones set from the fourth movie, I want to say. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I had that set, so I hope I'm not. It also came in the Raiders of the Lost Ark set, didn't it? Everything's coming back to me now. Anyway. It's a really nice piece. Why? Because it takes up a lot of like real estate on the mock. It's a very large piece. It takes up kind of the bulk of the chest there, and it fits really well. You know, the fact that this guy is Death Shadow, the transdimensional bounty hunter. It kind of does imply this sort of more grim aspect to this mock. It looks a little bit more sinister, just a little bit more cool in general. And so I like that. Just doing one piece that can do such a large amount of work for this mock. It's establishing a bit of personality. You don't have to add like 70,000 million pieces on the torso there. It's just the one part. It works quite well in creating that torso there. And you get to get this really cool skull look on the mock as well, which is a little bit more difficult to do with some Bionicle pieces. So it's cool and quite creative and clever, and I like that. And the final system thing that I'm going to talk about on this mock is the really, really super cool minifigure cape that's used here on the waist. I've always said, and I'll say it again later on in this episode, using capes in mocks is a great idea because it just makes them look cool. Kind of adds a bit more depth to the mock, and you can kind of cover up some of the uglier parts on a mock with cloth. And that's not to say that's a lazy thing to do. It just honestly almost always looks nice. So see if you can add a little bit of cloth, whether it's on a waist or an actual just a cape or like a scarf or, you know, maybe a nice cravat or something. Anything. See what you can add onto a mock. See how it might affect it in some way and change it. But really nice work here on this mock, Death's Shadow. There's a lot of really cool system pieces being used here, and it's complementing the Bionicle very nicely. On to the next mock. This is a mock by Hells, that's his name, and this mock is called Rahi Toa Magammar. So of course this seems to be inspired by kind of like a stag beetle or something, a beetle with a rather large kind of horn coming out of the top of its head there. And I always say that, definitely look towards the animal kingdom for some inspiration if you're in dire need of some. And why is that? Because there's so many different animals in the world, and so many of them look awesome. And you can get a lot of inspiration from them. I mean, you've got a rhino with a big old horn coming out of the top of its head, you've got tigers with their awesome stripes, you've got a whole bunch of different fish with different, like, crazy weird spikes and teeth and all sorts of different things. You got a plethora of ideas right in front of you, and you get to look at cool fish and animals. That's a fun day out on its own. So go to the zoo, go to the aquarium, and go, while you're looking around, of course, have fun looking at the lions and the monkeys and all sorts of things. But also go, you know what? I could put that on a mock. And then do so. Great idea. And I think the stag beetle inspiration on this, now I'm assuming it's a stag beetle that inspired him. He might have been like, no, it was the North African snow leopard that inspired this. I'm like, oh, well, my bad, but that's at least what I'm seeing. But the horn itself on the mock, it kind of forces your eye upwards. It's kind of creating this invisible line that leads your eye kind of curving up, you know, sort of in the general shape that horn is actually flowing up on this mock. And that's really clever because the horn's kind of creating this really strong presence to this character. It makes him look kind of tough and a little bit cocky. You know, when somebody in the real world is trying to, you know, pretend they're a bit more tougher or stronger or kind of assert their dominance, even gorillas do it and stuff. They puff out their chest a bit and they kind of, you know, tighten up their spine and they kind of pretend they're a little bit bigger than they actually are just to sort of stand their ground and show their dominance and presence sort of thing. And this mock's kind of doing that. This horn is leading your eye upwards and it's kind of actually forcing a lot of the mock forward just in the general shape of the rest of the body. And that's cool because a lot of characters being established as a result. So it's certainly something to consider is on your mock, can you create something that can kind of be this focal point of the mock? And can it kind of change the architecture and the kind of overall shape of the body of this mock? You know, like a rhino, is that horn going to be very much a sort of driving line that forces the whole body forward up until the point of this horn. And the horn is very much this focal point on the mock. And, you know, it is this very proud and strong character that very much leads from the front, you know. Or they're a bit more of a sort of sneaky character. Their back's kind of curved a little bit and they've got their arms kind of, you know, pointing all their fingers together like Mr. Burns going, excellent, you know, all sorts of things like that, you know. Maybe they're a little bit more hunched over and reserved because they hide in the shadows, that sort of thing. How can you form the shape of the body to illustrate something about the character? And you may not have those answers right away, and that's okay. Maybe watch some cartoons or some movies and stuff and study the body language of characters or animals and things and sort of see how those actors are portraying those things. Or definitely, like I said, look to some cartoons because cartoons can often be kind of over-exaggerations of characters to really seriously establish who they are and go quite over the top with it because cartoons themselves are over the top. So pay attention to some of that kind of character design and see how that could influence your mock in some fashion. I think this mock does a great job of that. The horn really helps to shape the rest of the body and establish character. It's cool. I like it. So really nice work there, Hells. Let's move on to the next mock. This is by Charles Able and is called Zia. So I really enjoy this, the idea of downscaling things. I remember when I was a bit younger, I don't know where I saw it, might have been in a convention somewhere. This guy made this kind of scale model of a car of some kind. And he liked it so much, he went, I want to do it again, but I want to do it half the size. And so he did. And he's like, I want to do it again, but make it half the size. And so he had about 3 or 4 different models. One of like a little itty bitty tiny like Hot Wheels size car. The one was about double that size, kind of like, you know, like something you could fit a little small, like 3 3/4 inch action figure in. Then you had one that was about like minifigure scale. Then you had one that was like Technic Fig scale. Then you had one that could fit, you know, like a Barbie in it or something. It was massive. So it was kind of just going down in size and the challenges that arose with that where, you know, on the larger mock you go, I only need like one piece for this windshield. But when you go a bit smaller, you're like, ooh, how can I tackle this problem? I can use this piece or I can, try it from this way. Or now I get to use these really large wheel pieces instead of these small ones, stuff like that. So I like this idea of building the mock in a larger form and a smaller form and seeing what things kind of echo each other and what things are different. It's just nice to look at and could be a fun challenge for you as well, especially if you've made a mock that you love so much. You want to do more with it, but you don't want to take it apart. maybe you can downscale it in some fashion. I think one of the cool things about this is he's used a lot of system here because, I've said it before, system is a great thing to use in Bionicle because the pieces are naturally a lot smaller, so you can pack in a lot more detail. So because of this, the head, the torso, the arms and stuff, a lot of those orange pieces there, they echo a lot of what the original has. There's a little bits of detail that are kind of being conveyed and passed over, that sort of thing. So, yeah, a lot of the original design is being echoed in this redesign, which is cool. Man, even with my new microphone, you can still hear my chair squeaking. I apologize for that, but blame my chair. Anyway, I said before cloth pieces were cool, and this MOC is no exception, using this more custom cloth piece here. The colors on it are really nice. It does add kind of really interesting flair to this MOC. Kind of reminds me a little bit of something sort of maybe, almost Arabic, or kind of reminds me of the colors you saw in like Thor Ragnarok on the planet Sakaar, that sort of thing. Really weird and funky out there colors. That, it's very colorful, it's very different, very out there, but it's quite fitting, and they work surprisingly well together, which is cool to see. So that's something to consider, downsizing a MOC, or even upscaling a MOC, and seeing the challenges and the fun that can come out of that. And also using a bit of system there to pack in a lot of details in a smaller space. Cool ideas here. On to the next MOC. This is Adrim, Toa of Metal by Adrim, Toa of Metal. We're talking about system stuff, and there's a little more on this MOC here. I love the system details here to kind of form this waistcoat design. It does make him look a little bit more kind of warrior-like to some degree, giving him little bits of additional armor that kind of can cover up a little bit of the waist there, and just give him a little bit more extra detail. And it's something you could easily add to any of the kind of G2 Toa designs, is just that little bit of extra detail there on the waist. There'll be a few extra connection points you can probably find on there. There's little bits of system that'll be a lot easier to kind of slot in there than adding this big old cumbersome Bionicle piece. So it's clever. Also, these weapons really fit this MOC. This big old axe and this really awesome looking shield. And I like how much that fits the idea of a Toa of Metal. If they're a Toa of Metal, they probably do a little bit of blacksmithing, kind of making lots of different metalwork weapons and, armor and all sorts of stuff like that. And I like that this MOC actually has that. He has some cool armor, he has a cool shield, and he has a big old war axe that he probably uses to create and craft all of his different weapons and armors and things in his blacksmith or something like that. And I like that. It's really fitting for the character, it's really fitting for his element. So it's always something to do. You can go like, okay, well, what weapons would a Toa of Fire have? Maybe they'd have a cool fire axe or a fire sword or a flame shield, something like that. See what sort of stuff you can kind of relate back to the element. And if you can't find any links, that's okay, just give them a sword. It'll probably still work. But that can be a little fun challenge for you and a fun thing to experiment with for sure. Also love the pops of purple on this, really very effectively fits the mask here as well, helps to tie the color scheme together. Really, really cool. On to the next MOC. This is by Sigmox, and this is Aukume, Toa of Magnetism. I love the idea of using these trans green pieces here as this interesting energy effect, like he's got some, what's probably his powers over magnetism or something, and he's kind of disrupting the energy around him and creating some kind of cool magic effect or something. It just looks super, super cool, and that trans green beautifully pops up against the black of this, the MOC here. It's just really nice. Also love too how effectively that brain attack visor in green or trans green there, it fits perfectly over the G2 Onawa mask there. Never would have thought that would have worked, but it works very nicely here on this MOC, so that's easily something you could try yourself. And also here's another MOC with some cool capes on it. Love a good cape, and this shoulder cape is a very nice example of that. This is the Bis fashion show. It's the latest trend on Bionicle MOCs. Maybe it's in season this year and your MOC could find one at your local store, or even just get one out of the closet. Cut up some old clothes you aren't wearing and put them on a MOC, or just get one from a set or something. But I mean, overall, the general frame and silhouette of this MOC is beautiful. But one little detail that I really like, if we take a look at the knees here, he's added some tires over the kind of knee joint there. And if you kind of look a little bit closely, you can see little bits of grey there have been, used underneath. And there's little bits of grey scattered throughout this MOC here, but only little bits. And I think if those tires weren't over the socket that actually connects the knee, that forms the knee rather, that connects the lower leg to the upper leg, it might be a little bit too much grey, and it might not quite fit in with this predominantly black colour scheme. But adding the tyre in over that, you kind of cover up some of those parts that don't quite work. So maybe grab some of your tyres from some system sets and just see what you can do with them. And that's the other thing too, you can put them over points of articulation, and they can kind of cover up some of those parts that are difficult to cover up, but it may not necessarily hinder the articulation, just sort of make it look prettier. that's cool to see and really nice. On to the next mock here. This is by Daniel Comlossi, and his mock is called the Nomad. So yet again, another fantastic cloth. This really is just the cloth episode. This is a custom cloth, of course, not taken from any sets, just used on some cutting up some old material or an old piece of clothing or something. But it forms this beautiful cape, this beautiful hood, kind of like a poncho design almost. It looks really nice and really fits the kind of assassin aesthetic that this mock has. Something else that I really love is the mask choice. Giving an assassin this cool skull mask is very fitting, but it's also really nice to see this system skull shield at the bottom there. Of course, that's just a shield with some really beautiful printing on it. But again, that fits the assassin aesthetic, and it nicely ties the mock together because it's got a skull mask and it's got a little skull on his torso as well. Really fitting. And also something else to consider with some of your system pieces if you're looking for some. Take a look at some of those funky stickers or printed pieces, because they often have some really beautiful patterns or textures or images on them. They could fit beautifully on the mock that you're working on currently. And you can have some nice unity here with multiple skulls used on the mock. Something like that could be fun and worth doing, that's for sure. On to the next mock here. This is by Mitch Henry, and it's called Pinhead and Armstrong. I've always loved the character trope of the really short, not so bright guy, but the really tall and brainy guy. I've always thought that was really funny seeing that sort of stuff in cartoons or movies or animated movies or whatever. And it's great to see that translated here into a Bionicle and to have really effective character designs that really effectively illustrate that. You don't even really need to read the description, but you can effectively tell, like, hey, that's probably what these characters are. Love the pop of trans green here on the head design here. The very strong kind of red and black color scheme here is beautifully complemented with that nice slight pop of color there. It's just fitting and looks nice. And on the little smaller, stubbier guy here, I love the fact that Mitch has used those Praetorian Guard armor pieces there for the upper arms. And then the fact that the lower arms are those three kind of interesting sort of circular Technic pieces. And you kind of have some nice rhythm between these two parts. You look at the Praetorian Guard armor piece here. It kind of has these three very distinct kind of sharp angles to it. And then Mitch has used these three circular parts here. So you kind of get that effect of that three ridges on the upper and the lower arm there. And now just, sort of texture-wise, they're a bit different. One's more of sort of triangular in shape, the other is more circular and just kind of lines forming from the three pieces. But the kind of pattern of the three flowing lines on the top and then on the bottom kind of creates this nice rhythm and everything flows together nicely. So it's just kind of cool to see, and it's interesting to kind of focus in on that you can have quite different textures, but the lines on them and the rough shapes on them are kind of working together in a really cool way. So maybe you could do the same on a mock that you're making. Whether that's with these pieces or not, but you just find certain things that almost kind of rhyme to some degree. Maybe that was why I had a nice poem at the start of the episode. We're going full circle. Also really cool to see the tire arms on the taller guy here as well. Simply using Hero Factory prefab limb pieces and then just adding a bunch of tires on there. It's a really simple design, but it looks great. Nothing wrong with a simple design like that when it looks that awesome. Nice work, Mitch. On to the next mock. This is called Cultus, the Assassin of Darkness. And this is built by Electro Dragon. So I really like the little flame details at the back here. Simple, doesn't even necessarily relate to the mock, but it establishes a nice atmosphere as you go into this mock, and that's cool. And I know builders like Gringat and a few other people who, they really like to put music on the posts that they post on mock pages or certain other websites, or at least have a link to some music, and they say, like, be sure to listen to this song while you're looking at this mock, because the atmosphere in this music really fits what I'm trying to communicate. So maybe adding in little elements like this, like little bits of fire in the background, or some flags in the background, or whatever, could help to establish an atmosphere. Maybe just with what you're building, you really want to communicate something, or you really want the audience that's watching it to feel something. Maybe some little visual elements that you can put into the photography can help to communicate that. Whether that's just the lighting, or some little additional props or something, whatever. It can definitely communicate something, and your audience will feel something as a result. So if that's something that you're looking forward to doing, or you're looking to do, there's something you can consider. Anyway, I love the really simple idea of using an upside down foot piece here as a head design. It works surprisingly well. Kind of looks like this interesting kind of robot head design here. Quite sleek angles to it, which again kind of fits this assassin look. And then this more slimmed down, fairly basic kind of prefab CCBS structure or frame to this mock is also really fitting, because it is a bit more slim, which works, and works really well, especially because this is an assassin. Of course, they naturally would be a lot more slim and agile. And the way this is designed, that's well, being communicated quite well. So nicely done. And also really cool weapons as well. I think those fit an assassin very nicely. On to the next mock. This is by Joshua Johnson and is called General Mashu, or General Smash You as he is sometimes known. So boat sails actually work really well as some cloth elements. Of course, that's sort of been our little sub-theme in this episode. So that's always something to consider. Take a look at some system sets, whether they're not actually kind of cloth elements. They're a little bit different, like a boat sail or something. They can have interesting textures like this and can work well on a Bionicle. I think it's also a really awesome combo too, using some cloth elements, having a more bare-chested mark, and then giving them a really awesome beard like this, because you kind of get this interesting kind of Greek god or Roman god kind of look to the mock. It's fitting and it's a unique look. Also like the idea of the little toes on this mock and the kind of sandal that he's got here. Again, kind of fits with that aesthetic, and it's just a fun little design as well. And you can give your mock toes if you want to go and have it be super, super posable. That's a fun idea. So like his big, really massive over-the-top eyebrows adds a lot of character to this mock and is very funny and very cool. And also we read a little bit of the backstory behind this mock. He says that this guy had mastery over the alchemical arts. He reconstructed himself by crystallizing his alchemic energy and blowing off and critically injuring most of his body. And that's why he's got this funky trans side of his body here. A fun backstory and a really clever way of doing the mock, especially too, I don't necessarily know if this was his original intention, but maybe you're building a mock and you realize you can only build one arm or one leg. And sort of half of the mock is kind of not quite accomplishable with the parts that you have. Or maybe you could do an asymmetrical mock like this and give him a fun backstory like that. So he has, you know, an all sort of crystallized magic side of his body, and the other half is normal. So you can kind of counteract a problem you might have during the building process with some fun backstory, which is really cool. So I love this really fun, goofy, but also slightly serious and super cool mock with a lot of fantastic techniques in it. Really nice work. On to the next mock. This is a Fancy Minute Mocks episode. I always like to jam-pack a lot of mocks into this one, so you got a few more coming, guys. Don't you worry. But this mock is by Nick Maplejuice, and it is called Kenki. I like a lot of the weapons on this mock. Using this interesting fin piece here to kind of form a blade. It's a really clever part use, and a great way to use a piece that just might not work for you. Maybe you don't really build anything that would require fins, or any other kind of weird part. Or maybe you could reinvent it into some sort of blade on some kind of weapon. And also adding that tube, sort of wiring it around the hilt there on that blade. It looks pretty cool. It's a nice little detail there. And it's quite simple too. You just sort of wrap that tube piece around it and find some way to connect it on both ends. And hey presto, it looks pretty good. I also like some of his other weapons here. These kind of batons using just some very simple axles and stuff. It's a simple weapon, but it works really well and looks quite nice. It's not something you see every day, even though it's a bit more of a simple construction to make one. Works quite well here on this mock. Also, the color scheme here, black, red, and yellow, looks great. The colors really pop and flow nicely into each other. Very nice. On to the second last mock in this episode. This is a mock by Sam, and the name of the mock is SpeedFreeze. He is named SpeedFreeze because he can run so fast he can freeze time. So Sam here is a 7-year-old fan of the show. I really wanted to put his mock in here because it's awesome to hear that there are some younger people getting into Bionicle, even though the theme is not something that's around anymore and construction is a lot more difficult to find these days. You kind of have to get it online. You can't really find it in stores unless you look super hard or you find a store that just so happens to have some. It's awesome to see that the younger generations are getting into Bionicle and thoroughly enjoying it. And that's really why I do this show, is to inspire people, so that they can make and generate exciting and new ideas and enjoy themselves with Lego. So that's really, really cool to see. So really awesome, Sam. I'm glad that you're enjoying your Bionicle, and you've made a fantastic mock here. I love the gun design that you've made on this one, using one of these arm pieces here to kind of form the barrel of the gun, and then some other pieces there at the back. It's a really effective, cool looking design there. Very clever. And the head design is also pretty cool too. Overall, you've made a really nice mock there, good sir, and I look forward to seeing what else you can do in the future. Would love to see some more stuff from you, buddy. Nice work. On to the final mock here. This is by Mimicry Works and is called Serixi. Color scheme on this is gorgeous. Teal is, I would go so far as to say it's one of my favorite colors. Complementing it with the silver here, it's never looked better. Looks beautiful. Those colors are great together. And I also really like the leg design on this kind of more strong looking thigh design that transitions down into a bit more of a sort of skinnier, thin leg, kind of forming this interesting robotic leg design here. Kind of almost looks like these lower legs might have some sort of like springs in them or something, and he can jump really high or something like that. But it does give him this interesting robotic look. And I think that actually complements the mask really well. I never thought that Jala mask looks so much like a robot of some kind, and it fits really well and looks really cool. Of course, the Jala mask being in silver there is custom, whether that's been painted or, molded in a different color by like mold-up masks or socket ball or something like that. I don't know. But regardless, it looks beautiful in that color and fits this MOC very effectively as well. I also really enjoy his gun arm design here. This looks really cool and really fits this really interesting robotic, almost sort of sci-fi look that this robot has here. It's really nice. Also, of course, too, really like that Rakshi head, the Rakshi heads, plural, on the shoulders here. Those pieces are always so good and work so well at making a really organic, rounded looking limb design. Whether that's a upper arm, a lower arm, a leg, or a foot, or whatever, it's just a really versatile piece. And this is a really beautiful MOC with a gorgeous color scheme. Can't get over how nice these colors look. Nice work, good sir. And that has been a whole bunch of fantastic fan-submitted MOCs. Like I said at the start of the episode, you can submit them through the email you're currently seeing on the screen, or you can copy it in the description below. And also you can check the description below for my MOCs, other people's MOCs, all sorts of MOCs. Now I know what you're thinking. It's time to go. But you don't want to. You're sitting there screaming, oh no. Well, more will come. Just wait and see. But for now, it's goodbye from your pal, Ben Cossy. Thanks guys, happy building. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.